The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Clarity First. I am very happy to have you with us today, and I seem to be having a little bit of a technical difficulty here. You need to see my screen. There we go. Oh, no, that's not what I want you to see. Hang on. Let's see. This is what I want you to see. All right, there we go. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Clarity First. I'm so excited to see that there are people from 27 countries on the webinar today, which is almost close to a record. It was one more country on the last one. And so welcome, everyone. I know it's very early for some of you, very late for some of you. So I hope that you find that this is a good use of your time. If we could do a quick sound check, I'd like to just make sure that you're hearing me loud and clear. If you could raise your hand on your control panel and let me know that you're hearing me loud and clear, that would be very helpful. All right, great. I see lots of good hands coming up. All right, I'm going to come put you all the hands back down. All right, so I think what I'd like to do is start with first a little bit of history, which I haven't shared on any of the other webinars, about where Clarity First, the book, came from. So many of you are aware that I had a book that came out in 2012 called The Outstanding Organization. And you know, as an author, you never quite know how a message is going to resonate and whether people are going to enjoy it, or if they're going to buy the book, not buy the book. It's a little bit of a like a risk, that you do. You put all your heart and soul into a book and you never know what's going to happen. With The Outstanding Organization, it was my fourth book, and the big surprise with that one was that Chapter 2, which was on clarity, there were 4 different elements of The Outstanding Organization, which are clarity, focus, discipline, and engagement. So Chapter 2 is on clarity, and it got by far the most attention, the most emotion poured out of people. I got the most emails about the chapter, and I knew that there was something more to be explored with clarity. And there was one guy that was an engineer, kind of a big burly guy, an engineer at a firm I was working with, who was not given to showing emotion at all. And I got this very passionate email from him where he said that as he was reading the clarity chapter in The Outstanding Organization, he actually cried a bit. And it was because he realized to the degree to which the lack of clarity was dragging him down, his team down, and his entire organization down. And he had never really understood what the lack of clarity was doing, or he never really understood why the performance levels they wanted weren't being achieved. And then he finally realized it was due to lack of clarity. So what happened after that book came out, I was always noodling on what my next book should be. And I decided to go into a deeper dive on clarity, thinking that, naively, it would be a very easy book to write. It's one subject, it's not 4. Oh my, I couldn't have been more wrong. The more I dug into clarity and the lack thereof and the reasons for it and what to do about it, the more I realized that there just is a whole lot to be mined about clarity and what it could do for us and how it works against us if we don't have clarity. And when you look at where we're at in the world today and in politics today, no matter which country you're living in, there just seems to be, an increasingly dangerous path we're on in terms of hiding from the truth and being afraid to confront the truth. And when you look at business performance, that's really what it's about. That actually is really what lean management is about. At its core, it's about surfacing problems. But when you think about what that means, that really means it's about surfacing the truth. And it's high time, I believe, to, put our fears aside, deal with them, put them aside, whatever we have to do in order to become braver and deal with clarity, because it is a good thing for everyone. Now, clarity, I want to go into some definitions here, because sometimes people think that, clarity means focus, and it doesn't. They're 2 very different things. So to me, the opposite of clarity is ambiguity. So you think about, the soapy window, and, you look out, you can't really see everything, and then you get the window, the Ouija, what do you call it, the squeegee, and you start pulling down that soap, and you start seeing what's really out there. That, to me, is the contrast between being in a very ambiguous environment and dealing with an ambiguous situation and dealing with the clear situation. The definition that I came up with as I was writing the book was that there are 3 elements to what makes clarity clarity. One is that there's coherence. So in other words, there's this stickiness and this, things make sense and one thing leads to the other and it all kind of hangs together. One is precision. So precise to me means no extra fluff. Precise means that it is, you don't have to work toward, figuring out what's going on. And elegant means in the simplest terms that are needed in order to get clear. And we're not just talking about conversation. We're not just talking about communication of any sort. We are talking about organizational performance. I'm sorry, it is communication of any sort, but it's all kinds of communication. So organizational performance in large part is about how communication occurs between people and how communication occurs between teams, and then finally how communication occurs between the leadership or the board of the organization and the people that are there in order to do a job. So in simpler terms, let me just say that coherence, precision, and elegance translate into being complete. So information is complete, tells the whole story. It's accurate, meaning it's not untrue and it's not hard to understand. It is easy to understand. So those are the three kind of simpler terms to think about. What is clarity? Clarity is information that's defined as complete, accurate, and easy to understand. Now, ambiguity, the opposite of clarity, if you think about what it does in your personal life, at business, in teams, even one-on-one with your friends and family, ambiguity complicates, it slows the understanding and the uptake of information. It frustrates. Ambiguity is frustrating. And it increases the risk of injury. Anytime you're in an environment where there's high stakes from a safety perspective, ambiguity is not your friend. You want to get as clear as possible about the risks, how to mitigate them, what happens if there is some sort of an injury, all of those things. And when you take all of that together, especially in a business context, ambiguity is very expensive. It requires us to do more rework. It slows productivity. There's a lot about being in this kind of fog where you're trying to figure things out and understand what's really going on that is expensive. Now, one thing that people misunderstand is that, ambiguity, the opposite of clarity, does not mean that you're going to be in a certain environment. In other words, ambiguity and uncertainty are different. Uncertainty is real. It's a part of life. We don't know when the next, environmental or weather-related, incident's going to happen yet. I mean, you might get closer to it as you get closer in time. The prediction factor increases, but we really don't know when the next big thing's going to happen. We don't know when the next terrorist attack is going to occur. We don't know when, the market's going to tank and when the stock market's going to slow. There's all those things that there are indicators, but we don't really know. So ambiguity, when you hear these, what kind of slays me is hearing organizations have job descriptions or job postings where it says, must have a high tolerance for ambiguity. No. You do not want people that have a high tolerance for ambiguity. You do want people who have a tolerance for uncertainty, but ambiguity is man-made. Ambiguity is what we do to make life more difficult than it needs to be. We don't want people with a high tolerance for ambiguity. In fact, you would like to have a full team of people who have intolerance for ambiguity. That's what makes for high performance environments and really great work organizational kind of impact on individual employees' lives. So here's an example of a situation I ran into. I had moved back to Santa Monica after years being in San Diego. And I'm not in Santa Monica now, but this is back a couple years ago. And I finally got unpacked. I finally was going to the grocery store for the first time. And parking had gotten monumentally more difficult than when the first time I lived in Santa Monica. So I'm going around and around the blocks trying to find a parking place in this urban environment where the store didn't have a parking lot. And I finally found this place and I was so excited and I was, exhausted from moving and unpacking. And then I got out of my car. I'm like, oh, wow. Can I park here? And I I spent literally 5 minutes reading all these signs, looking at my watch, trying to figure out if I was within the right time frame to park. And I thought, what have we done here? And these kinds, if you start, really paying good attention to ambiguity and clarity, you are going to see ambiguity everywhere. And the need for clarity is going to emerge as a top condition in your life. I gave an executive briefing not too long ago, and I went back to the company a couple weeks later, and I ran into two different executives, two different times of the day, walking down the hall, and they both said, "Curse you, Karen Martin." And I was like, "What?" And they said, "We can't stop thinking about clarity. It's so pervasive, the lack thereof." And I said, "Yes, I know. That's why I wrote the book, to heighten awareness and give you some, tips on what to do about it." So it is everywhere, and we need to do something about it. This is something that I'd like you to take a look at. So this is a optical illusion written by or made by a professor in Japan. And what you'll see is, if you look at this carefully, you cannot see all of the dots at any given time. You can see them if your eyes wander around the image, but it's very difficult to see them all at once unless you're way far away from your monitor and can still see those little dots. What happens in organizations is we have this kind of environment where we've got this matrix covering up our dots. It's the version of the fog, as I talk about. And what happens when you lift the fog is that you're able to then quickly see the picture, the clarity about the picture in front of you. And this is true with decision making. This is true with understanding performance. This is true with just one-on-one communication. We have to eliminate that ambiguity, that fog, that matrix in order to see what's in front of us clearly. And then life gets a lot easier. So back to certainty. So certainty is, one of those things that is very elusive, and it's difficult to get certainty even with very robust problem solving and very good decision making and all of those things. But I just want to make it very clear that when we're talking about clarity, we are not talking about certainty. They are two very different things. And so you can be very clear that you're uncertain, and that's a good thing that you're clear that you're uncertain. But they're cousins, but they're not siblings, I guess I'll say. So what happens is, in interpersonal relationships, in teams, at work, at home, you have this is what I've discovered as I was doing my research, you have a primary leaning, and your leaning can be different in different circumstances. So you could be, for example, a clarity pursuer, where you both communicate with clarity and then you clarify the information coming at you. So everyone is an information provider and an information receiver. And you can easily shift from being a clarity pursuer in one setting to being a blatant clarity avoider in another setting. And a clarity avoider, really does not want to know what the truth is, and doesn't take the time to pursue clarity, and doesn't really spend time in that space of wanting to understand and wanting to know. And there are reasons why, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Clarity blind is not, this is not a linear description. These are three distinct categories. Clarity blind is a situation where either you don't appreciate the need for clarity and that clarity has any value, or you do but don't know you don't have it. And that's a dangerous place to be. So one of the things that we need to do is, in every moment of every day, be as incredibly present as we can, so that we can start seeing, oh, I'm being an avoider here, or oh man, I just learned that I was being blind there for a moment. And the more you practice this, and the more you get tuned in by being present and thinking about how you think, metacognition is the term, the more you'll be able to pick up on this and move that needle from being a clarity avoider or clarity blind to being a clarity pursuer much of the time, both as an information provider and an information recipient. So one of the things I created, and you'll see a link for this at the end if you don't have a pen and paper to take notes, is there's a free quiz online, a free assessment, and it's clarityfirstquiz.com. And you can take it to study both what your propensity for clarity pursuing versus avoidance is, and what your organization is as a whole. So it's broken into different categories that marry up with the sections of the book. And I welcome you to take that and get a baseline, and then you can use that to put an action plan in place once you know some things that you can do to improve your clarity and to increase the amount of time you're a clarity pursuer. Then you can use that as a baseline and then repeat it after you've done some practice. So again, you flex. You could be a pursuer with peer groups and an avoider with your bosses. You could be a pursuer at work and avoider at home. You could be blind in very specific cases where you just don't know something, so that you can kind of flex around. But I still believe, and there's no proof on this because the evidence has not been really robust research done on this. I believe that everyone operates more or less from one place. And I happen to be a pretty intense clarity pursuer, as evidenced by my very first corporate boss, Roberta. God bless her. Roberta sat me down one day and she said, kind of in a stern voice, Karen Martin, you have a very high need to know, like it's a bad thing. And so I want to talk about what happens to us in our programming that causes us to move from being a clarity pursuer to a clarity avoider. There are two traits that we all can possess and babies possess from birth. And it's critical that we operate with from these two places of being much of the time. So one of them is humility, the opposite being arrogance, and one is being curiosity, the opposite being just closed to wanting to know and wanting to learn. And they go together. They're very much bedfellows. And so when you're working in life, and operating in life, whether at work or at home, it's critical that you operate from a place of humility. If you don't, you're not going to learn nearly as much as you could and should. And if you don't learn, then you stagnate. And same with curiosity. You need to everyone needs to operate from this real childlike place of, I wonder why that is. So again, let's talk about what happens to us that makes it not as easy to function with these things. So first of all, think about little children. What is the most common question children ask? Why, mommy? Why, daddy? Why? Why? It's a beautiful thing. They come out of the womb as these curious beings. There's no child who's not curious at birth. And as they grow, what happens is we get into, say our parents get very busy and they're stressed and they get, enough with the why. I heard this as a child. I was a very big why asker. And I heard it, my mother, my father, they'd get busy and tired and, just enough with the why. And then, of course, some parents go to that place of, because I said so. And every time you hear that, that's telling you that being curious is not safe and it's not valued. And in fact, it could be very, very bad. Then you get into the workplace. Same thing happens sometimes with early bosses like Roberta. You have a high need to know. So basically, stop asking questions. That's a dangerous place to put people. There's a reason why people do it, and it's not really an intentional thing. It's, just circumstantial. But every time someone does that, a boss says, stop asking questions, you are being programmed. And you carry that programming from job to job to job to job and become part of other teams. And in fact, can become a CEO and still carry that baggage unknowingly. And so it's important, again, for us to work on getting very, very present so we can get in touch with our thoughts and our feelings so we can uncover these things that need to be mined back up and reignited out of us. If you have direct reports and if you oversee a team, same deal. You got to watch them and listen deeply and see where their curiosity has been tamped down, drummed out of them, and where their humility isn't there because of fear. So let's talk about what happens now when you get into the uncomfortable place of having curiosity beaten out of you, hopefully not literally, but just this insidious little by little, it's not safe to be curious, and you take little kids that turn into very, very unhappy adults. Subtle, but unhappy when it comes to not being able to mine that curiosity back up. Social programming is a big part of this as well. So remember the big saying, curiosity killed the cat. that's not a good thing. So that's sending a message, very strong message, that curiosity is not a good thing. And then how many of you remember Curious George? Curious George got himself into trouble all the time and had to be rescued by the man with the yellow hat. And so, he was always getting in trouble because of his curiosity. Again, subtle but important message. Curiosity is not a good thing. It's not a safe place to operate from. So we have to, as adults, understand this, and we have to start with our teams mining that curiosity and helping people reignite it. The other thing that's not working in our favor is the fact that we're human beings, and so now there have been more than 180 cognitive biases identified. And cognitive biases are ways of thinking that get in your way of becoming clear and learning the truth and wanting to learn the truth. So one of the most common cognitive biases is confirmation bias. You probably have all heard about that, where you seek the information that confirms your position. And it's a dangerous place to be. It's a pretty human place to be. But when you seek only the information that confirms what you think, then you're going to be, not a great researcher and not a great scientist, and probably not a great problem solver. And so you have to, be, again, very present to start seeing that you're operating from one of those biases. Very closely related to biases are assumptions. So here's an example of a common to show that we commonly have assumptions. What does this say? How many of you say jumping to conclusions? Does it? So we operate, they're helpful. Biases and assumptions are, helpful to help us make sense of the world, but they're very dangerous if you're unaware that you're operating from that place. The more you think about biases and think about assumptions, the more you're going to catch yourself making assumptions. I had someone on my team recently make a comment about, this email problem that we were having, and just, leaped to some conclusion that, well, it's because of, and I won't repeat what the end of it was, and that wasn't it at all. I mean, it wasn't even close. And these are people that all do this kind of work, and so it's very difficult to stay clean all the time and operate from a position where we're not being sucked into assumptions and biases. But the more you think about it and the more you care about it, the more you'll be able to catch yourself in those situations. Now, another thing that gets in our way is time. Clarifying takes time. It is not nearly as quick as just skimming over something and not really figuring out the depth of what's really going on. And, even in problem solving, you see it all the time where people just rush ahead before they fully understand what the problem even is, let alone what the solution is for, or what the root causes are for it that would then lead to the solution. But the thing is, there's a very, very strong correlation between going slow enough without becoming, analysis paralysis and becoming paralyzed. There's a strong correlation between being more thoughtful and methodical up front and rapid results down the road. So if you go slow to go fast, you're going to have much, much better results than just trying to speed through the day because there are too many pressures. So, there's a whole thing we have to think about in terms of time management and focusing in on the relevant few and getting those done before we move on, and reducing the chances of needing to switch tasks back and forth, which wastes time. And there's all these other things at play that help us become better clarity pursuers. Rushing is not your friend when it comes to clarification. At the fundamental core of all of these different things, biases, rushing, being a clarity avoider, is fear. So fear is at the core of everything, and it's a subtle little thing that really affects organizational performance profoundly, because organizational performance is a result of individual performance. And when you have individuals operating from a place of fear, even if it's low-grade fear, you just have that subtle little, slowing down and kind of, creating a little bit of a fog, and then that fog leads to more fog, and then more fog leads to more fog, and before you know it, you've got an organization that's, like the Tule fog in the Central Valley of California, and you can't even, see in front of yourselves. And so this, this whole notion of W. Edwards Deming was a big proponent of, banish fear from the workplace. He's so right. There is so much fear in the workplace that we have to really confront in order to be able to get a culture of clarity in place. So, in the book, I divide up the work space into 5 different areas: purpose, priorities, process, performance, and problem solving. And then there's another chapter that's just about you. And it's really interesting when you write. That you chapter is at the end of the book, very intentionally. It used to be 3 chapters at the beginning of the book when I first started writing. And, it just wasn't flowing. And working with my editor, we decided to do the organizational performance up front and then say, okay, so that's all fine and dandy, but here's where it really starts from. It starts with you. And then we condensed and took out a lot of content, actually, of those 3 chapters to make the chapter about you. So that's kind of how the book is organized. And I'd like to spend just a few minutes on each one of these. There's a lot in the book, but, this is a webinar, so we have to just do the high points. So let's talk about purpose, first of all. There's been a lot of talk about organizational purpose, and one of my favorite thought leaders is Simon Sinek. And when he wrote Start With Why, that was one of the books that profoundly changed how I was thinking about business performance and strategy. And, by the way, Start With Why was the influence in how I came up with the title Clarity First. I just kept, going back and back to Start With Why, Start With Why. I love that title. And Clarity First kind of emerged out of that thinking. So let's talk about performance. About purpose. So many organizations and most leaders are very, very good at answering the question, what do you do? All the way down to the front lines. When you say to people, what do you do? They can answer that question. We provide loans. We make conductors, electrical conductors. We make cars. We heal patients. We provide healthcare. We help real estate deals get done. We provide help from a government perspective. We have public parks. We serve the public through public parks. You name it, everyone can say pretty much what you do. Then it gets a little more tricky when you ask the question, what do you really do? Because now we're getting into problem solving, and what problem does your good or service actually solve? So some people can answer that when you start helping them understand that everything is in place to solve a problem. If it's not solving a problem, it's not going to be something that anyone wants to use. Then you can usually get some pretty good answers based on that. What's so fascinating to me over the decades of doing this work is how few frontline people, there's very few frontline people that can answer the question why, unless the company has worked hard to make that clear. But even at the senior leadership level, when I ask, why do you do it? Most people can't answer the question. And so mining the purpose, and the purpose is there. It's not like you have to make it up. It's there. It was often more evident with the founders of a company because the founders usually have been very clear on why the company exists. And then over the years, the longer your company is in business, excuse me, the more you have new people come in place, the harder it is to keep clear about the purpose unless you've actively mined it and you actively talk about it in recruiting, in onboarding, at company meetings. You really need to keep true to your purpose in order to stay true to where you need to go as an organization. So here's an example. This happened, I was talking with a very, very sharp leader in a automotive tire manufacturer. And I said, what do you do? We make tires. Well, what do you really do? We make really good tires. Okay. Why do you make really good tires? Because, we want people to, be able to just have a long-lasting tire. Like, is that really why you do it? Long-lasting tires? Well, yeah, they shouldn't need to buy new tires all the time, and so we want long-lasting tires. Really? That's why you do it? And it took a long time for this gentleman to understand that the purpose, as I saw it, was to help people build their confidence that they can get reliably from point A to point B without getting themselves in a tricky situation. And maybe this is because I'm a woman and, we always are concerned about being stuck in the night, in a deserted road and those kinds of things. But I mean, I think men worry about that too. It's definitely something where a good tire makes you feel confident. And a good tire helps your car, operate better and all that. But it's that confidence from from point A to point B that is a little bit more close to what the purpose is of being a tire manufacturer. So it's important for all of you, no matter what your industry is, to take some time to mind this and determine why you do what you really do. And it's emotional. It's often very emotional. It's easier to do if you're a social service agency, a government agency, healthcare organization. It's easier to get to why. It's more difficult if you're an oil producer, you're a manufacturer, a paper manufacturer, for example. It's a little more difficult to talk about the why and to get beyond the what. But the why is what hooks people, and the why is where you start getting clarity as an organization on what really matters. And so to be putting a strategic plan together, for example, and not have clarity around why you do what you do is a pretty dangerous place to be. And that's why a lot of organizations don't move forward more quickly and more decisively toward their strategy. So as I said, purpose is emotional. So purpose is almost always, when you think about the answering the question why, there's almost always something that's behind it that's emotional. Even if you make wire brushes for cleaning, industrial equipment, and it's not a very sexy product, but when you think about what that does for your customer, you can definitely get all the way to the point where it makes someone safer, or it makes someone's job easier, or it gets down to people, because everything we do touches people. And I won't go into my little thing here about profit as an outcome, but this is, if you focus on what you're doing that's related to people, human beings, and if you create work environments that are very, very human centric, profit will come. If you find a product that people want that solves a good problem, profit will come. It's just, we have to turn our thinking and get much more tuned in to the emotions that we all have, and because we're all human beings. All right, enough about purpose. Now, priorities. So this is the one that's kind of near and dear to my heart, because this touches on focus from the outstanding organization. And what we find is that most organizations, in addition to not being clear about why, are not really clear about their true north. So you might have part of your senior team thinking that you want to go here, and you might have another part thinking you want to go there. And until you marry those two and get true consensus, and consensus does not mean full agreement. Consensus means full commitment to a direction. Until you get full commitment in your senior-most leadership teams, it's going to be very difficult for the organization to soar, because you need that level of clarity and alignment in order to be able to get the masses behind that senior leadership team that are supporting that leadership team to be able to all work in the same direction. And it's very, very powerful whenever you get to that place. So there's all these different projects to be done, problems to be solved, improvements to be made, products to be developed, customers to serve, markets to go into. I mean, it's endless. And so the organizations that do the best are very, very good at taking all of that and focusing on the relevant few, identifying and focusing on the relevant few. And until you get clear on what those relevant few are and get consensus around those relevant few, again, it just drags, it creates all kinds of organizational drag to have people operating in different directions. It's like pulling in opposite directions or going in other directions. So a means to do that, and if you think back to what we've been talking about, all the different things I'm talking about, for those of you who are very familiar with lean management, are all components of lean management. So at its essence, lean management is about helping clarity emerge across the organization in all areas. So strategy deployment, also known as Hoshin Kanri, the Japanese term, is a means to execute on strategy in a very, very clear and focused and disciplined way. And by taking the relevant few, you see I have 15 lines here. So for big projects, 15 is a lot for an organization to handle in 1 year, unless it's a very, very large organization. So you want to be very careful that your strategic initiatives that are framed as problems to be solved are that you can actually accomplish those and accomplish them well as an organization. Not doing this is like going to a buffet and saying, "Ooh, that looks good, and that looks good, and that looks good," and piling up food and food and food on your plate until you eat all that and you get sick. There's no way you can eat all that. So you have to have a more measured approach at the buffet table and decide what you will and won't eat. And then you're feeling a lot better. Same kind of thing in an organization. So this is just an example of a template I use for some clients, not all. Every client has a different need. And a lot of people ask me about this little section over here. The level of effort area is a way to assure that you haven't picked too many that are going to hit one area too hard. So you can actually, list your different functional areas in the organization, and then just directionally determine whether they have no involvement in that initiative or that problem to be solved, very light effort, or 1, medium effort, a 2, or very heavy effort, a 3, to make sure that you don't have, say IT 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. That would be not reasonable for them to be able to accomplish all that in one fiscal year. These are usually fiscal year related, not always, but often are fiscal year related. So that's an important part of becoming clear about priorities and executing well. All right, let's talk about process. So process is near and dear to my heart because I have a very strong belief that we've spent our entire existence as an industrial world focused on managing people, quote unquote. We talk about it all the time. We manage people. We manage people. No, you cannot manage people. You can manage products, you can manage projects, and you can manage processes. You cannot manage people. You can lead people, you can influence people, you can motivate people, you can degrade people, you can tear people down, you can do all those things, but you're not able to manage people. That's not possible. So if you have really well-defined processes that are being measured and monitored on a regular basis, that are constantly being improved to marry up with changing conditions, and you've got very clear ways of helping people know how to do that work and getting trained and have a deep understanding of how to do the work and be successful, you don't have to manage people at all. You don't even have to think about it because the people will manage themselves. So processes become one of the ripest areas for an organization to gain clarity around, because most organizations are abysmal in understanding what their processes are. It's like the parable about the blind men, where the different blind men go to an elephant and they each touch a piece of the elephant and they each conclude what it is that they're touching. And so one blind man says, "Oh, it's a fan," touching the ear of the elephant. And another one says, "Oh, it's a snake," touching the nose. What do you call the elephant's nose? I'm blanking. But touching the end of the snout, and that's not a snout. Whatever it is, the trunk of the elephant, thinking it's a snake, and so forth. They're not seeing the whole. And so going back to what lean management offers us and what we've learned from it is that you can see the whole very, very easily by doing what's called value stream analysis and looking at performance across value streams. So if you look at an org chart, most org charts are very functional based. You have this department and that department and this department, and they're function based so that everyone's operating a bit in a silo. Value stream view of the work is cross-functional across many, many departments usually. And that's the customer experience. The customer doesn't care about your functional departments. The customer cares about the order coming in and the end product coming out. So looking at work at a very high level, very complex work systems, especially at a very high level, enables you to get very clear on what's really going on. The other thing about value stream analysis that's interesting is it's a visual storyboard of how work flows through a very complex work system. And one of the things that becomes clear is up here you'll see all the different IT systems that are at play in a process and supporting work flowing through an organization. And very often people have never been able to see the interconnections or the lack of connections between their various systems until they have this visual picture of how those systems support or don't support the value being delivered to a customer. There's metrics you can use to look at performance and all of that. But if organizations haven't taken the time to identify their value streams and then understand the value streams and then ideally improve those value streams strategically first and then tactically, you're going to again have that organizational drag that's going to help, or it's going to hinder you from performing at higher levels. So value stream performance becomes a very big part of it. And not to have a shameless plug, but one of my books is called Value Stream Mapping, and it's the mapping part of understanding the value stream and improving it. So you can take a look if you'd like to learn more about that. Now, another thing about processes is that there's a metric that's very helpful when looking at clarity that's known as percent complete and accurate, percent C&A. This metric was designed for, or defined first by Bo Keat and Drew Locker in their, I think it was a 2004 book called The Complete Lean Enterprise. And it was a follow-on to the landmark book Values, what's called Learning to See. Learning to See by John Shook and Mike Rother was the first book about value stream mapping, and The Complete Lean Enterprise was a follow-on book about mapping office processes within manufacturing. And Bo and Drew defined this metric called percent complete and accurate, which is, for those of you in manufacturing, similar to first pass yield, but it's for information. So basically, you think about passing work from one person to the next, or one department or one team to the next, and looking at the output being passed, which becomes the input. So number one's output becomes number two's input. Number two gets to say, hey, how much of the time, what percentage of the time do I receive input that's complete and accurate, meaning I don't have to do any form of rework? Now, Bo and Drew defined rework as adding missing information that should have been supplied and correcting information that was incorrect to begin with. Mike Osterling and I, when we wrote our first book, was the Kaizen Event Planner, we were working on this and decided that there was a third type of rework that's clarifying. So we're not suggesting that you shouldn't clarify when you need to clarify. We suggest that you should eliminate the need to clarify by having better processes and better information coming into a work team or an individual up front, so you eliminate the need for that clarification, because clarification takes a ton of time. And so if you ask teams what the quality of the input is, or you can sometimes measure it, sometimes it's more anecdotal and a bit more subjective, you can find out that there's, in some cases, 0% of the time work is passed from one team to the next or one person to the next, and it's 100% complete and accurate. So it's a very big, Mike calls it the hidden beast. It's a very big deal. We see it all the time, very low levels of complete and accurate coming across from different departments. The other thing is that it is very essential that you work with this metric in order to heal human relationships. I'm not kidding. A lot of the interpersonal and interdepartmental tension comes from people getting work that they have to constantly work at making it better before they can do their work. And that constant need starts getting people frustrated and then angry at their peers that are giving them the work. And when you get these cross-functional teams together, one of the beautiful things that comes out of it is people saying, well, I didn't know that you thought it was poor quality. We've never had this conversation. And, well, what do you do with that? Oh, well, this is what I do with that work. Oh, I didn't know that's what you did with it. And we find this, just pretty easy much of the time, understanding that develops, and that understanding can build better processes in place. And then you get rid of the interdepartmental or interpersonal tension, and it's a beautiful thing. So it's fascinating how a metric can heal relationships. But I got to tell you, this one is powerful. If you don't use it, I recommend you start trying it because it is powerful. I'm going to take a quick break here because I'm getting a lot of questions about the material and the recording. Yes, we always record our webinars, and it'll be up within 24, 48 hours at the most on our website, which is tkmg.com. Or for those of you that know me a bit, also is ksmartin.com. We're changing our name to TKMG. So we have both URLs are live. And the materials are on your control panel. If you look at your control panel, you should see a little section that says handouts, and you can see the PDF is attached there. It also will be on SlideShare within 48 hours or so. So you can always go to SlideShare to our channel, which is Karen Martin Group, and you can get it from SlideShare if you'd like. So I hope that answers your question about the recording and the materials. Okay, back to our mission at hand here. Clear processes, as I see it, are documented. So we see lots of work that is resonant in people's heads. It's a dangerous place for an organization to have people carrying around processes who may leave the organization and not documented anywhere. They need to be documented. If they're documented, they need to be current. And so we see a lot of documented processes that are extremely antiquated and don't reflect the current state at all. They need to be followed, meaning that someone has to be checking to make sure that the processes are being followed. And if they're not being followed, look into why it's not being followed. It's hardly ever because someone said, ha, 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 I'm not going to follow this process because I don't like it. Most of the time, people don't follow processes because the processes suck. You have to have processes that work. You have to have a work environment that allows people to become the best version of themselves. If the processes don't enable people to be successful, they will create workarounds. So if you want processes to be consistent and have consistent outcomes and predictable outcomes and low variation or lower variation, you have to have clear, documented, current processes that are checked. They need to be consistently monitored because you need to be able to know when you need to adapt to changing conditions, and they need to be regularly improved. By whom? By the people who do the work, not the leaders who oversee work, not consultants who think they know. They need to be improved by the people who do the work, who are indeed the experts. Now, this is an example of where we have a big project right now with Adventist Health Lodi Memorial. This happens to be an example of one of their standard work items. This happens to be for isolation policies. And I'm sharing this just to show you that standard work, as we call it, is not at all like the old SOPs, standard operating procedures, or P&Ps, policy and procedures, and these big wordy documents. Most of the real estate is actually visual. And if it's very computer centric, then they may be screenshots. If it's a physical process, it might be pictures or drawings. So whatever the visuals are that kind of reflect the work is what you do. It's also very light on words. Just the facts, ma'am, is what the phrase that we use. So just the facts, and visual and very simple and tested by people who are new to the process so that you get it very, very clear what the steps are, and an area that talks about why that step is important, because people they'll follow processes better if they understand the implications if they don't, or the impact if they don't follow up a step or don't do it a certain way. And these also include the standards that say either this is high output, high quality, and this is acceptable, and this is not acceptable. So you want to have all of that in your standard work. All right, moving on to performance. So performance is a biggie because we need to know how we're doing. All people need to know how we're doing in order to be able to perform. For those of you this is an American football screen, so you can think about soccer, basketball, baseball, cricket. You can think about any sport. What would it be like to go to a game and not be able to see a scoreboard? What is it like for the team that can't see a scoreboard? What is it like in the case of American football to a quarterback that can't see the scoreboard? Or the referees? Everyone follows the scoreboard because they need to understand where you're at in order to know what to do next. Many, many, many organizations lack a visual scoreboard, dashboard, scorecard, whatever you want to call it. Many lack the clarity around how are we really doing, and if they do have one, they're often just financial in nature. So what we suggest is, take away the problem with teams not being able to see what's going on. Give them the ability. This is a basic respect for people thing. And by the way, clear processes that are well designed are also showing respect for the people who do the work. So this is a very heavy respect for people. Clarity and respect go very much hand in hand. So they need to be able to see what's going on in order to know what to do next. Level 3 scoreboards are one thing that are very helpful to help people see overall how are we doing. So this is like the health of the organization. Just like every once in a while you get your blood pressure checked and maybe your sugar checked, your weight, your height, your temperature. There are some key things that you always know in order to know, are we healthy? Your car, the same thing. You've got a dashboard. It doesn't show everything that you need to know about your car, but it shows the essential, the relevant few things you need to know if your car is going to function properly. So having a balanced look at the things that we call them critical to business and critical to customer, although we actually say it in reverse, critical to customer, critical to business. You want to have metrics that are meaningful and that show the gap between where you are and where you would like to be, that drive ongoing performance improvement and continuous improvement and problem solving as an organization. So a level 3 scoreboard might be at the executive level, and then maybe at a division, or if it's a large department, you might have a level 2 scoreboard that feeds up to these different metrics that feed up to these high level metrics. And then you might have at a team level or a small department or work team level, a level 1 scoreboard or scorecard or dashboard, whatever you want to call it, that feeds up so that you get this, kind of alignment all the way from the front lines to the senior leaders in helping drive performance, and getting clear about what matters is what enables that to all happen. So think about, and by the way, you'll notice that the financials on this are not on the top line. That's very intentional that they put the financials. This is actually adapted from a real scoreboard. So if you take a look at the different metrics that they're picking, they're definitely heavy financial, but there's also some things that are very human oriented, like for the employees, the safety rate, from the customer perspective, the fill rate, the quality rate, etc. You also need to get very, very clear from a performance perspective on what's the incoming demand. I cannot tell you how many clients we work with where when we ask, what's your daily or weekly or monthly demand or annual demand, cannot answer the question. We can't even begin to answer the question. How do you staff appropriately if you don't know what your demand is? How do you, decide how to actually structure the organization if you don't know what your demand is? So this is an example of a client that we worked with that if you see the black bar on the bottom, the only thing we had when we walked in was demand about this call center they had, the black bars. And then as we started working with them, we learned that there were 3 other sources, and they were not redundant sources. They're 3 different sources with different requests coming in. This is an IT area that was getting different IT requests. And basically, you look at the size of this total bar, and you see that it didn't double it, but almost. The demand was almost double what they thought it was. And so that's a dangerous place to be. So we have to take away the cobwebs in front of our eyes and get rid of the fog in the organization and get clear about what's really going on. Same with staffing to demand. Demand's a really big deal, and we find organizations have all kinds of internal sluggishness and not meeting customer expectations and all these things because they don't staff to demand. And I'm not suggesting you increase staffing. In fact, most of the time we find that they actually can let attrition help them decrease staffing once they get rid of waste in areas and once they staff to demand. So we find a lot of people with excess capacity during slow times and people working at 3 times their capacity during peak times, none of which is good for the company or the people themselves or the customer. So getting clear about staffing compared to demand is an important thing. Another thing, this is just, we have all kinds of visuals, and there's more in the book of different visuals to get clear on, this mess of warehouses and distribution centers and where's product going and losing track of product. And then you'll see things like, product goes from one area to another area, and then it goes backwards. So, this was fascinating to map this out and just look at the chaos that had been created in the current state, and then redesign it so that you reduce all the chaos. And then daily management is one of the best ways to be able to see at a very local level how an organization is performing. So daily management becomes critical. And last but not least is problem solving. And this, I'm not even going to really go into much during this webinar. There is a webinar on problem solving already out there. You can also get our webinars on YouTube and Vimeo in addition to the website, but it's already pretty detailed on problem solving. But I will say this, that I did spend a fair number of years analyzing why people were unsuccessful with PDSA, plan, do, study, adjust, or PDCA, plan, do, check, act, or DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, and control, or any of the number of other improvement problem-solving approaches like Ford's 8D, OODA, there's all kinds of them. And I found teams over and over and over and individuals not succeeding like they could, and realized that part of the problem was the oversimplification of the problem-solving process by using these acronyms. And, so I use an acronym, CLEAR. But what isn't happening in any of these things are clear questions that need to be asked no matter what the methodology is you use. The questions remain the same in doing good problem solving. So I spent some time, figuring out what those questions really are. They can go out of sequence, but this is more or less in sequence of the kinds of questions that you want to ask for many reasons. Ultimately you want results, but you also need to sell the need to solve a problem internally. A lot of people forget that. And so some of these clarifying questions up front are designed to help you sell the need to solve the problem in the first place. This is a visual storyboard known as an A3 report that for complex problems is very helpful in coaching problem solvers, helping them break habits that they've got and form new habits that are more indicative of disciplined problem solving. It's also a wonderful way for people that are tangential to the problem or key stakeholders in the problem to understand the thinking, the data, the facts around it, so you get greater alignment and greater clarity around why a quote solution, or we call it a countermeasure, why that's going to necessarily solve the problem. So a lot more, again, I have entire webinars on A3 that you can take a look at. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but clarity, clarity, clarity. What are we trying to do and why are we doing it? So at the end of the day, as I mentioned, organizational performance improvement is a reflection of individuals performing at high levels. And you just have to take up this campaign for clarity and work it at your local level, no matter where you sit in an organization. There's so much you can do to help improve the level of clarity and reduce the ambiguity. And little by little, you get a critical mass of people interested in that. You can move mountains on this whole spectrum of clarity. And the other thing I'd like to say is that, oops, I'm sorry, let me go forward here. There we go. Fuzzy words are a tiny little thing you can do. You can just, in conversations, anytime someone uses a fuzzy word that's not precise, you can just say, what do you mean by that? You can do it at home. You can do it with loved ones. We accept these fuzzy words, and yet your version of far may be very, very different from my version of far. So we tangle ourselves up in communication by allowing fuzzy words to rest. And just we need to do our best at helping that through. And then finally, I kept mentioning earlier about being present and being able to see that we're operating from a biased place, or see that we're operating from an assumption or with an assumption. This clarity pause stuff is really important, which is stopping, slowing down, taking a breath, learning more deeply, asking more questions, so that we can move forward more decisively and with higher levels of trust and confidence that we are moving in the right direction, because we truly know, even if knowing is uncomfortable. So what we want to do is we want to move from this ambiguous, foggy environment that we work in, or we play in, or we live in, and little by little lift the fog so that we can be freed from the shackles of ambiguity, and so we can once again be able to be in a place of love, curiosity, humility, and able to do really good work because we have an environment that enables us to do good work, and it's a very, very deep, profound place of clarity that enables us to get there. So if you haven't taken the clarity quiz, I recommend you take it to get your baseline, and then to, just talk about it at work. Have people at work take it as a team and take a look at what your results are as a work team. And then finally, if you would like some more information, you can always pick up the book. So I'm going to go ahead and stay on for another 2 or 3 minutes if there's any questions. I think there's some that have come in. Let me take a look at this. We did go right up to time, but I just wanted to offer a little bit of extra time. If you need to go, I wish you a great day or evening wherever you are. Thank you for joining us, and please feel free to pass on the recording to people, promote it on social media if you'd like, so that others can learn as well. And if you are going to stay on for a few minutes, go ahead and start jotting your questions, or I'm going to lower all the hands. So I've now lowered all the hands that were raised. If you'd like to have me unmute you and ask a question live, I'm happy to unmute you as well by raising your hand. So you can either type it in or you can raise your hand. All right, so I'm going to take the first question. Can you offer any advice for reaching out and connecting with organizations who need, even if they don't realize yet that they need, consulting services to improve organizational performance? Oh, wow, that's a big question. So yeah, it must be someone who's just starting consulting, talking with people, asking questions, I never have done, I've been in business 25 years. I've never done cold calls. I've just, formed relationships and gotten word of mouth referrals, eventually, started writing books. And that's a very big question. I'm sorry. It's hard for me to answer that because I don't know you or what you're doing consulting wise. Any other questions coming in? Why don't you raise your hand if you have a question coming in, because I just don't want to hang on here if there's nothing coming in. Okay, I see a hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute Linda to see if she wants to ask her question live. Linda, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Sorry to bother you. Thanks. I've really learned a lot. But my question here is, the books you've written, are they sequential in terms of, because I have the Kaizen event planner. What is it, metric-based processing, or is it just one book that covers the whole? What would you recommend?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I have a visual that I don't think I can find quickly enough to show it, but there's kind of a loose hierarchy. If you think about overall organizational performance, I would say the outstanding organization is the place to start. And then Clarity First is one of the 4 behaviors or conditions: clarity, focus, discipline, and engagement in outstanding organizations. So it would be second to look at overall performance. Value stream mapping would be the high-level view of process improvement. And then the Kaizen event planner, you often are able to get quicker results through offering Kaizen and holding Kaizen events to make the improvements of value stream work. And within Kaizen events, you sometimes need to do metrics-based process mapping in order to map at a tactical level. So they kind of flow like that. So I'd say the outstanding organizations, the highest level. Clarity First is one segment of that next level. Value stream mapping starts getting more into technical improvement, more of a how-to, and then same with Kaizen Event Planner and metrics-based process mapping, kind of more of a how-to tactical level book, if that helps.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question. Have a good rest of the day or evening. Okay, I see Tess has a question, or Tessie. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm going to unmute you.
Yes, it's Tessie. Hi.
Hi, Tessie. How are you?
Karen, thank you for a lovely seminar, kind of workshop. I'm calling from London in England.
Hi.
And the question I have is, how can you use clarity to work through what can be a very sticky situation? So where there's conflict and people aren't getting on and some of them are behaving really badly. How can you basically governing bodies? What would your suggestions be?
Well, I tend to run into groups like that a lot because people bring us in when they have those kind of sticky situations. And the first thing I do is start talking about the benefits of clarity and asking for permission. I ask for permission a lot, asking for permission to walk them down a path to clarity. And I often don't talk a lot about the conflict directly, but I just let them kind of come together in terms of agreeing on a direction and then working through this, whatever the tricky situation is, in the spirit of clarity, and it kind of resolves itself. It's really interesting how it's a side benefit that you don't have to go straight at it. But I also very much intentionally pull people in the room together who are in conflict. And
Wow.
so rather than avoided the conflict, I am a conflict confronter because
All
I
right.
think, we have to heal conflict in a way. And I think that when you get people to agree on different aspects, then that starts little by little helping them start trusting each other again, and the conflict often melts away. The conflict is it's hardly ever personal. It's almost always around, the way that work is being done or the way policies have been rolled out, and I think that's important to remember, that it's, not usually about Bob not really liking Sally. It's really Bob not liking what Sally's doing, and Sally's doing something based on a work system, and so I don't know if that helps at all.
It's helps amazingly. Very, very good. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I hope that helps then. Let us
Yeah.
know what happened.
So I'll let you go.
All right.
Thank you.
Best wishes. Good luck. Okay, let's take one more question. Let's see if there's any other hands that are raised. No, I don't see any other hands. I think that might be it then. So thank you everyone again, and feel free to drop a line if you have any follow-up questions. And I wish you all a great day of clarity, a great month of clarity, a great life of clarity. It's an important element for us to honor and work toward in every facet of our lives. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.